Welcome to the Empire, buddy. This is Rampart, and welcome to another interview that I want to do today. Today, I am here with TheTerminator, where, similar to my interview with Legend of Total War, I want to try and pick his brain about a possible spiritual successor to Medieval 2, seeing as how currently the project Renaissance that I am doing to try and develop such a thing is currently in full development right now, or trying to be, and it is interesting to just try and talk with the community and get ideas about this project. And so I will let the Terminator introduce himself in case you guys are unaware of his works and what he does on YouTube.
Sure. Hello. So yeah, I'm the Terminator. I've done a kind of YouTube channel mainly around Total War for about, I want to say, almost 3 years now. It'll be 3 years next March. And yeah, I make, kind of mainly videos around fantastic mods in Total War, from original Rome to I don't really do a lot of videos on the Warhammer, so it's mainly the historical titles, even though I do play them, but it is mainly historical kind of mods that I cover in Total War and other games as well. I mean, I'm currently playing like Knights of Honor 2 again, which is a lot of fun, and very much looking forward to Manor Lords and other kind of games like that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, I know for myself, I always check your channel a lot when I need to think about new campaigns to play. It's like, oh, what mod should I try next? I do that a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think it was actually through you is what I found the Empire Total War 2 extended mod, which is
okay,
it's a pretty
right, yeah.
fun mod, and when it's stable.
Yeah, that's the thing. When the mod is stable, it's good, but it's for mods like that especially, stability is a big problem, and with older games, stability is one of the primary issues.
Oh yeah, and that actually kind of maybe leads into one question that we could maybe start off with, because your channel is so focused on modding. Um, how so in terms of a spiritual successor, I guess, how would you like the modding to be considered? Would you prefer that it's preferred to considered from the very beginning for development, or it's kind of more of an afterthought, or more of a thought later on for more developed tools to try and support that?
I mean, I'm a big advocate of mods for games just generally. I think Total War, especially the older games, would not be as popular as they are today if they didn't have the kind of modding support that they did, or at least the efforts that a lot of modders made to create kind of new campaigns and experiences. And I firmly believe there are tons of vanilla players who don't touch mods, but if you look at a game like Medieval 2 or Shogun 2 or even like
Rome 2 or
even like
Attila?
yeah, like all of them, they have like a kind of relatively healthy player base for how old they are and how dated they are compared to modern games. So it's a lot of it, I imagine anyway, has to be down to the hundreds and some of them thousands of mods that people have made. I mean, I think Rome 2 has almost 5,000 mods, and it's just
Jeez.
insane. So I guess to answer your question, I would kind of hope, at least as a player, that modding would be made available quite quickly for your game.
Hmm.
Um, I think that one of the kind of big issues in Total War is that modding is kind of an afterthought, and so modders have found it very, very difficult to do some of the stuff that they've done. Even however amazing they are, it's taken them years and years to do a lot of the stuff that they've done. Like the newest tool that is developed right now for Rome 2 onwards for campaign modding, it's called Came by the Dauntless Days team. That thing took like 5 6 years to make at least, so
Hmm.
it's so tough for modders in the series. And I think having that kind of availability and capability for this Renaissance game would be a big plus. But again, I guess it depends on how much work that takes and what you want to prioritize. I mean, equally, a lot of people, I imagine, would want a really good full effort spiritual successor, and if modding is going to take away from that, then it's a fine balance, you know.
Yeah, and I know from the beginning, this has been a thing that I've resonated really well with our main coder, where we are very focused on being able to try and continue to keep modding in mind while we are developing this. We want to make sure that we consider the data structures that we're using are very moddable. I know right now we're using a lot of data tables to make it very easy to spawn in cities, for example, so there's not going to be a hard-coded limit on how many cities you have on the map. Trying to think of as many ways to leave the game moddable. Like we've been considering so many different types of things that, like, okay, this could be for example, like there's been one thing like we're thinking about, like, hey, do we want to just try and include a little modifier that allows, if someone wants faster battles or slower battles, like a small little modifier to change how battles feel. A lot of like personal, like quality of life little modifiers we think we can include as a simple variable that is changeable, so that we want to try and design it in mind with okay, a full experience, but also understand preferences will change between people, and so allowing things like that to be readily available immediately, and then just give the abilities for modders to be able to change those as well, I think is a really good thing for the game in general, because I know my gaming channel would not exist without Medieval 2 Total War mods. It wouldn't. It just wouldn't. Because I agree, I don't think the Total War series would be where it is today without mods. I don't think it would be.
Yeah, I mean, flexibility, I think, and the opportunity to tweak and change different variables, I think, is pretty important, not just for a player, but for a modder as well. So, I mean, like, as an example, you look at Total War Pharaoh, okay, regardless of everything it's going through, it's got an incredibly detailed kind of campaign and battle and AI customization that in many ways, I mean, the first time I looked at it was quite daunting, but as a player you can play around with so much and create your own kind of campaign. That kind of flexibility is really interesting and cool and engaging, and having that in a kind of Renaissance game like you're developing wouldn't just be interesting for the player, but it would be great for the modder to take on board and tweak various elements. So yeah, as you said, I think that kind of flexibility is it goes both ways for the health of the game and the kind of modability for people who want to make that effort.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that I know I wanted to try and talk about. So there's a couple things that we could start off with. Few ideas I did want to discuss. I think it would be interesting to discuss maybe sieges. Sieges, victory conditions. That's another one I think is another interesting idea to possibly talk about. And then kind of battles in general. If there's any of those you specifically want to maybe start off with, and then we can branch off on any other ideas that pop up.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the general consensus is, but like personally, I think the best for me, one of the most memorable and engaging sieges in the series is actually Medieval 1, because of the multi-layered kind of large siege kind of battles that you could get into. I mean, it's dated if you play it now. I still go back and try and play it, but when I remember like the first time picking this up and besieging a large kind of fortress, and then having these like this first layer, and you're like, okay, cool, but there's like 2 or 3 more layers, and it's just an incredibly interesting and engaging, tactically different kind of siege style that you never really get again in Total War. I mean, Shogun 2 does it, I think, pretty well in terms of, you know, you've got that outer layer, and then you have to use kind of the stairs or climb the walls to get to the top layer. They did, I think, CA try and play around with different versions of that, but in terms of a medieval setting, I think Medieval 1 did some really, really nice stuff with those kind of multi-layered sieges. So that's kind of my initial thought in terms of how sieges would be pretty cool again. But yeah,
because I know for myself, I love how daunting a 3-layered castle is to siege in Medieval 2 sometimes. That should feel daunting to be trying to take a settlement with 3 layers. And I think it's something that the more recent Total Wars kind of lack, is it doesn't feel like the battle maps are designed to give an advantage to the defender. That's what it kind of feels like. It feels like there's so many benefits to just rush with the attacker, so you don't have to worry about the possible slog a siege should honestly be at times.
Oh, 100%. It's like it's it's almost a design philosophy that's aimed for the player to play inside the city, right? Rather than
Hmm.
actually take the city, you're encouraged to uh, essentially forget about the walls, and once you're in, fight over these choke points.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it's been for a while. But yeah, absolutely, those older games and the amount of advantage you get as a defender um, is it's much more challenging, and that challenge adds a layer of engagement that I don't think modern Total Wars do very well.
Yeah, and how do you feel about like deployables in sieges? I know for myself personally, even though I know they're broken as hell and overpowered, using stakes in defensive sieges is a really good feeling if you're fighting against somebody that has a lot of cav. But it does
Yeah.
feel a bit overpowered at times. But it does feel like deployables should be a thing for sieges.
Well, the reason why it's so overpowered is because the AI doesn't know how to react to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're playing against the player will ignore it or find ways to work around it. But if you're playing against the AI just beelines for those deployables. So it's almost like it's only overpowered because like the AI just goes for it and disregards it and kills half its cav in the process. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I think it's a very useful feature. It's a very immersive feature as well because it was used. It was used in warfare. So.
Yeah, because I know for me, I like that they did have them in Rome 2 and Attila. Deployables in those kind of felt a little weak. It still felt like the AI kind of just
Mhm.
what campaign was that? Um, that was in the 1100 AD mod, and even then they still just walked into stakes. The stakes were just
Yeah.
destroyed after one use, but even then the AI still would just walk straight into them. I had someone just kill their general by just walking straight into the stakes at one point in an open field battle.
Yeah, I think like in an open field battle, I think that it's such a shame that for the way that battles, especially in sieges, have developed to become more choke pointy, while having kind of deployables that are not kind of like the design isn't very well done in terms of using them to actually take advantage of those choke points and funnel AI into kind of death traps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you have is you're just using them in the most obvious places because the AI will just rush it. So yeah, I mean, you're totally right though. Even in open field battles, they're really bad. Which is again, it's not a deployable issue. It's the AI issue really.
Yeah, and I know that's something that we've been trying to like I've been thinking about this and playing around this as we've been developing our alpha pipeline on the first proof of concept for battles. Um, Still debating on like depending on how much work this would be, but I know one thought has been that we do want to make sure that generals have traits again, and one thought has been that um, I think there was like an aggressive attacker trait in like medieval 2 sometimes, or conscious defender traits, traits like that, somewhat actually dictating the kind of play style of the AI. This would mean technically trying to have multiple battle AIs, probably just three, a balanced, an aggressive, and a defensive, to try and have it so we can try and keep in mind how a AI is going to interact with certain things. Like maybe an aggressive AI won't care as much about deployables. Like they'll try and avoid them, but they would be like, okay, no, we feel very confident in going on the offensive, so let's try and rush, surround the enemy, and go after them just wholeheartedly. A defensive AI would more than likely try and focus on using its own deployables or being more defensive, maybe looking for a more high ground. Um, Essentially, really, like, I know my emphasis right now for the team is trying to really emphasize and focus on the battles, because I know this project really won't have a leg to stand on unless we can actually do better than the battle, be equal or better than the battles that Total War can do.
Yeah, I think that I mean just to address the traits point for a second. I think that's an amazing idea. Absolutely. I mean, if there's a way to have generals be quite unique and in their uniqueness dynamic in the battles and how they respond to the player, that is an amazing thing. I mean, has that ever been done in Total War? I don't remember
I
really
don't I
whether
don't
earlier
believe so.
games had.
As far as I'm aware, the
'Cause
AI
you
has
do get
always,
traits based on how you use your general, or
mhm. But that always is
but
just
I'll
changed stats.
exactly,
I
exactly,
I
yeah.
don't think it's ever changed how they actually play, because for all the hours I've put in Medieval 2, the AI always makes the same decisions, always.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
That, well, I mean, seriously, if that can be done, that is such a cool, interesting little feature. Um, and the other point you were making about, um, sorry, what was the other point you were making?
uh, let's see. So it was talking about that, then leading into the alpha battle uh,
Oh,
pipeline.
battles being better than Total War, or at least,
Yes,
enjoyable enough. Yeah,
yeah, comparable.
yeah. Sorry, short-term memory. Yeah, no, I honestly think that there's nothing really out there that compares. I mean, I'm playing like Knights of Honor 2 right now. The
Hmm.
battles are absolutely nothing like Total
Oh
War.
no.
You've got Manor Lords, which a lot of people obviously are comparing the battles there to what
Hmm.
is what it's like in Total War, and a lot of people are kind of writing it off, like, no, that's not what Manor Lords is really about, and it's true, it isn't. I mean, it
It
is like
reminds me more of Mountain
85.
Blade.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like 80% stronghold, like bits of like character customization and diplomacy and stuff like that, but the battles are going to be a very I think limited experience compared to everything else, and the reason I guess why I compare them to Total War is, despite how limited that will be, it will. I mean, from the looks of things, it looks quite Total War-esque. I mean, the
Yeah,
UI and the various abilities, the formations, the way they're engaging with each other, and how tactically you can move things around. I think they look very much kind of like Total War, but that's the closest thing really you've got. I mean, I really can't think of anything else that
the
really.
only other thing I can think of, but it's not even remotely close to sometimes, is the Ultimate Battle Simulator.
Yeah, no,
but
absolutely. Ultimate.
otherwise,
Yeah.
no one's ever, like, I know there was that recent one. I know you did a video on this too. It was kind of it looked kind of similar to a Three Kingdoms clone. That's like the closest thing that
Yeah.
recently I've seen. That's
Yeah,
been trying in
that's
that
close
space.
to. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's close. I don't really like it. It looks Total War-esque, but then it's limited in some ways and then bigger in other ways. So it's very different. I don't know if hopefully it gets that game in particular gets more development, and it gets into a state where you can actually do a proper one-to-one comparison. But looking at it now, it's still a ways off as well. There's also like Ultimate General Civil War, the Ultimate Admiral Age of
Hmm.
Sail game, and Dreadnought. Like those are again more modern style games, but from a battle perspective, they take a lot from the Total War formula as well. So I think there have been attempts to do
Yeah,
something kind of
but
like it or a little bit different, but nothing that I think has managed to draw away Total War players to say, "Hey, this is just as good or
yeah,
interesting and engaging enough to try out."
which has been kind of my goal. I know, at least essentially. I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the modding community in general. I am very much inspired by the fact that they're like, hey, we don't have tools to mod the map. We're gonna just brute force and make them ourselves. Um, and for me, I Medieval 2 is by far my favorite Total War. There's nothing that compares for that for me. And I really do want there to be a proper spiritual successor that people can enjoy. Um, because I think, and this is something that I focus a lot on with the team, is trying to understand why these certain design decisions are better or worse for the immersion of the game. Because I know, for example, I'm very dead set against replenishment. It is a very convenient system, but
Oh yeah.
it's so detrimental to small little things about making you care about your fights, making you care about your units. And even though it's so convenient, there's so many like very convenient things that Total War has done that have kind of taken away from the experience and the immersion of the game.
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, when you play a game like Warhammer 3 where you fight a battle, lose your stack, and then rebuild it within 2 turns, and then go back to play Medieval 2 where replenishment is very, very different, I think most players would freak out
Mm-hmm.
because of how easy it is in later games. And yeah, I mean, the best mods that I know of make replenishment difficult because that's what's immersive. You know, replenishment shouldn't really be an easy thing. You should find value in the army that you've invested in, enough value to try and protect
Mm-hmm.
and keep alive. So, like for me, the best example is Divide and Impera on Rome
Yep.
2 because it has a fantastic kind of multi kind of layered population system. You've got really tough auto resolve mechanics, so that you don't really want to do that, and you're encouraged to fight the battle, and the battles are slow enough and tactical enough that you need to uh, feel like you're protecting your units and minimizing casualties, and all of that leads to just a lot more onus on how important an army is. I think it suffers from the AI not having those same kinds of things, which would be interesting in terms of how you would approach how the AI interacts with various mechanics, because obviously a mod can go so far. If the AI doesn't engage with it, then you're always on the back foot, really.
Mm-hmm. Because
But yeah, I mean, I agree. Mechanics like replenishment are just really silly.
Because I know I was actually taking inspiration from Divide Imperial. I want to have a population system like that. I do. And I have been trying to keep in mind that any system we are designing, the AI will have to deal with it and will have to understand it as well. Might make it more difficult to get the AI right with us. That is entirely possible. But
Hmm.
I do not like the feeling that the AI is playing an entirely different game than you are. And
Yep.
I think because I know like I really like when I was playing through Divide Imperial last. I actually really did enjoy the recruitment system. It's like, oh, I have to actually make sure I set up one specific city for recruitment, so I actually get enough replenishment over there. Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to have all the units I want. And then when I was told that, oh no, the AI doesn't do this as well, it's like, well, that sucks. So that doesn't
Yeah,
matter
that
for
really
them.
does. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. It's so hard for me to play mods consistently enough to remember everything. Honestly, I'm playing like maybe 8 mods a month to try and learn them and make videos about them. So every
Mm-hmm.
time I go back to Divide and Impero, I'm amazed at how deep and intricate and engaging the mechanics are. And I forget. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like population was the best one because I started a campaign on the Rise of the Republic DLC with Divide and Impera, and I used this one city to recruit everything. And before I knew it, I completely ran out of population. I had like 500 people left in the city, and it totally screwed up my campaign. I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, well, shit, I can't recruit anything until like I have to think 10, 20 turns ahead to think about population levels and how to get this population over here, and it's just such a interesting system. So it would be great to see that in your game for sure.
Yeah, because there's a reason why I want to be able to go back to like the recruitment pool system and population system because like they're small little things, but they make you make creative decisions. It's like, oh, I don't have as many of my really good units in this area. I'm about to be attacked. What can I recruit really quickly to try and defend myself? Like there are so many like small little systems like that that I think add together that can make really creative decisions. I know for there's been so many defenses where it's like, well, I'm about to be attacked. I don't have much around here. I know I can get one more turn of recruitment. What is the best bang for buck unit I can randomly recruit around here to try and give myself a little bit better odds? It's also with mercenaries too, stuff like that as well is really nice for that. It's just more
Yeah.
creative decisions with your units as opposed to because like I feel bad. Like I was playing a Grimgore campaign recently. It's like, well, I'm about to be attacked here. Hey, I don't have my regiment. I haven't used up my regiment or down pool. Let me just recruit all of them here, spawn them into this one spot so they all die and defend this city. And it's like, okay, they'll replenish in like 10 turns. I don't care about those units.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really weird to see the series take that direction and take it's almost like take away your ability to kind of be an autonomous kind of player and have your own decision making kind of you don't really have any decision making kind of flexibility because it's so easy. people will just do the easiest thing available to them. So if you can do this one thing, you're just going to do it over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just you
Because
have
that reminds
no
me of doom stacking.
incentive to do anything else. Yeah.
Because doom stacking in Warhammer, the Warhammer games, you're incentivized to do that. If you want to do the best you can and take the least amount of casualties, you're incentivized to doom stack and just have insanely powerful armies that can take on multiple stacks and just instantly replenish. Which,
Yeah.
for spectacle, it can be cool. It can be. I have made doom stacks that have been fun and funny and that I enjoy, but also there's not as much. It's not as creative in some regards, or it's like eventually you could maybe get to some sort of similar army like that in like a Medieval 2 game. I know I am about to finish a Divide and Conquer campaign as Khazad-dûm, and
Mhm.
I have slowly but surely grabbed my most elite units slowly over time, and I'm going to throw them into Balin's army. So it is the most disgusting dwarf and doomstack you can imagine, but it takes me time to do that. And even still, those units, even though I've recruited them, they're not going to instantly continuously replenish. Like, I will still take attrition slowly but surely with those armies.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you don't want to have it so easy to create a doom stack within your first like 50 turns, but if you are building up to that slowly and replenishment is not easy, so you value it even more, it just makes it more rewarding. I've done like my own doom stacks obviously in like Warhammer, etc., but for me, I just get bored of it so quickly because of how easily early game you can get them. And
Mm-hmm.
then by the time you're like conquering a continent, you're just like, what's the point?
Yeah, I
um,
know in my Grimgore campaign, I actually had a lot of fun, and I made sure to save this general. I had a Goblin general that had just a bunch of like nasty skulkers and just basic archers. Like it wasn't a doomstack, but he kept winning fights just barely because of that army. And it was a hell of a lot of fun to play with that. All my other armies were just black orcs and doom divers, and it's just like, I even though that army wasn't as strong, I kept making that one because it was just more fun to play.
yeah, so I mean, you're definitely gonna get doom stacks in your game, but it's just a matter of when, I guess, and
Yeah, and it's kind
how.
of the hope that it's trying to make it so it doesn't feel like a doomstack. Essentially, it's like, hey, if you take time to slowly build up a really strong army, it can feel like a doomstack. Essentially, like it will be able to smash through anything, but it will take time. It will take to replenish it, and it's like that's. I think that's a good balance, so that even if you do get some sort of doomstack, that it doesn't feel too overpowered, that it completely removes the players' challenges that they're going to face. But I
Mhm.
think there's a happy balance there with the population systems and also with the recruitment pool system.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So here's one thing that I know I'm kind of curious about to get your opinion on. So for victory conditions, I know I've had some conversations with the team and wondering about. I know for myself personally, I do like the idea of having multiple different ways to kind of complete campaigns. And I know some feel hesitant, and I guess this is more so that there are some players that are very just battle focused. I am more of an RP focused player. I play a D&D weekly, so that's why. But
Okay.
I I'm curious what you think about like victory conditions.
It's an interesting topic because, you know, Total War suffers from late game fatigue
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to snowball, etc. But having a clear and engaging kind of victory condition that maybe you can even break up into multiple steps um, is always a bit kind of rewarding and incentivizing to keep going. I mean, Attila, for example, has for me one of the best systems because okay, it's quite generic. From going from one chapter to the next is essentially like survive this date, and then the ultimate victory is defeat Attila or defeat these nations or something like that, which is
Mm-hmm.
fine. But having that kind of system of step one is this, step two is this, step three, step four, step five, step six is maybe the final victory condition, and you can customize that depending on what you want to achieve in this campaign. Um, for me, anyway, is probably the best way to do it. Like I'm playing Knights of Honor 2 right now, and Knights of Honor 2 has an excellent, interesting, customizable victory condition system in which,
Mm-hmm.
like for example, one of the conditions is you you want to defeat a particular nation in your playthrough, and you can tell the campaign, you know, whether it's going to be a small, a middle, a medium, or a large kingdom on the campaign map, and that depends on how many provinces they own. So you can make the challenges as easy or difficult as you want. It's kind of missing that, like, I want to defeat this nation feature about it. That's what I would want ultimately. You know, if you're playing as Jerusalem, you ideally want the large kingdom to be the Fatimids, for example. So having that kind of customization, I think, would be interesting for victory conditions. And I think like ideally there are a variety of different ones, whether it's unification or uh, destroying a certain kingdom or achieving a certain kind of like economic or cultural victory that has a variety of options. I think it's just people can eventually go through all of them and then be like, right, okay, well, I've done it all. But as long as there's enough customization to make each one a little bit different, that is what would keep me interested anyway.
And I know for myself, I know for myself, I do actually have a playthrough of, I've tried Venice in Knights of Honor 2. I did the economic victory condition, which I actually found really fun and interesting. I do like the idea of having different victory conditions. I don't see an issue necessarily with having simple, historically targeted conquests, like, hey, hold this many regions and defeat these factions. I don't think there's necessarily an issue with that. I do like the idea of, this is just a thought that I don't know if we'll be able to implement it just yet, but it's something I've been playing around with, the idea of a possible religious victory condition that is not just convert so many provinces or like take this holy city. It's more so playing off the idea of anti-popes and like being able to create your own church. It's like, hey, yeah, the Catholic Church in medieval 2. Oh yeah, I don't like this pope. I'm gonna make my own pope, and it'd be kind of interesting to have a victory condition of instill your pope on the throne, so to speak, as like small little things. I know there's been a couple.
Would be helpful.
Sorry, you can continue.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, that'd be fantastic. I mean, religion and culture, I think, is an area that Total War hasn't quite explored enough in terms of different ways of engaging with it. So yeah, having the chance to create your own and then usurp the established one would be an interesting approach.
Yeah. And then I realized I just had another thought that I was about to say. Oh, yes. Which this kind of then leads into another thought that is currently being played around with. The possible different scripts, and actually I kind of take inspiration from Crusader Kings for this. Essentially, focus. This kind of goes back to the idea of allowing a lot of customization for the player. One idea that we've had is what type of possible campaign scripts we want to have. Like straight historical events are going to follow as usual. There's been one played around with that maybe will allow it so that if people want to be able to have access to all unit types from the get-go without too much issue, like just make it so gunpowder units can be really easily available. Like that's one other campaign script we might be able to allow in. And then other like ahistorical ones that I know Crusader Kings 2 I think had some of this. I think there's like an Aztec invasion that it was ridiculous, but like having simple little things like that I think honestly could kind of be really interesting. Like maybe even have victory conditions come tied to that. It's like, why not have a random Aztec invasion of the Europe? That'd be kind of funny, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could take a page out of the like the Warhammer games in terms of, you know, the chaos invasions and all that, but just slap it onto a medieval setting and say, you know, the Aztecs are invading, or there's like a Muslim jihad on the world, so all of the Muslim nations suddenly declare war on all the Christian nations, or I don't know, maybe like
I could see like a great like Viking invasion kind of thing too.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that the Scandinavian nations have reverted and decided they're going to do another Viking raid on Europe with like multi-snacks. Yeah, you could do tons of interesting little things like that.
Oh yeah. So I know those are things that have been kind of been played around with and would be really fun to include. Those are like definitely like further down the line ideas. I know right now, our current focus is basically trying to get to the point where we could have custom battles of just two factions to first test out, currently Saxons and Normans. Build that into the campaign idea eventually. I know we really want to be able to play around with the idea of being able to like form different kingdoms based on like what land you have, because like I know I'm just about to start a 1212 medieval kingdoms campaign as Nicaea,
Hmm.
and the idea that I'm going to be able to reform the Byzantines or the Roman Empire. Really want to be able to kind of try and include certain things like that, because Total War on its own, I don't has never had stuff like that. Well, there's been like one instance I think, and it was in the Teutonic Kingdoms campaign, I think it was, and that's like it, where I think you could merge like, um, was it Denmark? There's something you could do with Denmark that kind of changed it into a different faction. I think that's the only instance we've ever had, for the most part.
Okay, right. Hmm. I'm trying to remember. I feel like there were a couple others, but maybe not. But yeah, I totally agree. Again, going back to Knights of Honor 2, that they in the last like year they've released updates pretty regularly, and one of them is unification scripts. So you can every kingdom now has a kind of short-term goal to um, form a kingdom. So I'm playing Aragon right now, and you can essentially kick the Almoravids out of Spain and form the Empire of Spain. So having that in a game like Renaissance would definitely be quite interesting, quite cool.
Yeah, because I
It's
know.
it's again, it's going back to that idea of like, what as a player are you going to engage with, um, and be immersed by in the short term and the medium term and the long term, and something like unification is really good for short to medium.
Oh yeah, I would say so as well. Um, and I know I'm curious about. Okay, so this is something I know I talked a little bit about with Legend as well, but I don't think it's a bad idea to kind of double up and get other people's opinions. Um,
Hmm.
Buildings. How do you think buildings should operate? Possibly.
Uh, well, what are you thinking for buildings right now? And maybe I can
Right
respond to that.
for right now, the kind of current plan is a essentially going back to kind of the build system of Medieval 2, but combining it with aspects of Shogun 2 and maybe technically Napoleon 2, where the plan would be, for example, you'd have the city of London, and instead of having it so that every single building that is built in London is technically represented by the one mesh on the map, instead you're technically building up stuff in the region, and you have smaller cities that are designed to support the larger city that are technically representing where you physically have those resources. So you'd have your
Hmm.
farming town nearby, you'd have your mining town nearby, and essentially you're still building up similar to how you do in Medieval 2. So there's a lot of basic buildings that slowly you can just build up over time, but they are represented on the map, similar to how they are in Empire. But instead of you have to individually, and this is why I annoyed so much about Empire, individually just click through every tiny little city to upgrade them. No, it's still just attached to the big city for upgrades and repairs and everything like that. And that's the
Okay,
current
right.
plan.
And how would you have? I'm guessing you wouldn't do a province system. You'd do a region system, kind
Technically,
of like.
it would basically just be a region system where you'd have the central primary city with its supporting settlements are technically the region that you're controlling, and essentially, because for me, and this is why I really appreciate that the Medieval Kingdoms 1212 mod did, where it separated that all out. So it's just individual
Yeah,
cities, no more provinces. I love that. I hate the province system. I don't like it
yeah,
at all. And so it would be going back to kind of just more of a region system.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest complaint amongst people who talk about, region development, buildings, the economy system in Total War games is that they're so heavily dependent on provinces, and that it's not just kind of incentivizing the player to attack this region because that's the next region in your province, um, but also just kind of generally development. If you want to have a thriving kingdom, you need to own an entire province to really make use of everything. Whereas if you're focusing on single regions, each region will have its own challenges, its own lack of certain resources, maybe, and the kind of flexibility of giving the player the option to do everything and anything at the same time kind of um, it it's a kind of like a strategic layer of, right, I've got all these options, but which ones should I be using to make the most of this region, right?
Mhm.
And then how should other regions around it work together to kind of piggyback off of each other's benefits in various ways, or not. Maybe, you're building a building that's going to have a negative effect, and there, yeah, I think there's a lot more interesting gameplay opportunities when you have a system like that versus just, these three regions are in a province and they're all going to just do fantastic things for each other without any kind of negative impact on how you play.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're doing the best thing possible, really. I really like 12-12 system as well. Knights of Honor 2 is that system. You have a single region. You can build any number of buildings as you want. There's a certain number of resources that you have access to in that region. There's a particular culture there, a historical context to that region. Influence, loyalty, pop growth, whatever, you name it. Like having that kind, it's almost like each region as its own kingdom, and so you need to
Mhm.
make these kinds of interesting, kind of challenging decisions that force you to um, essentially opportunity cost to do one thing rather than the other. Whereas in the current system, you don't really have a lot of that.
Yeah, and that actually kind of the each region is its own little kingdom actually kind of plays into an idea I know. Um, it's an idea that I've had on how to combat the fatigue of controlling so many regions. I know in Medieval 2 there's just the very basic auto manage regions, which I don't think is a bad thing to have. Probably going to have a similar thing like that where you still control yourself, but
Yeah.
people have been asking, and I've been trying to think about how could we have vassals work in this game and actually have them kind of be meaningful and interesting. And I like the idea of you could still control all of your regions yourself normally, like you could in Medieval 2, not give out any land to your vassals. But I also do kind of like the idea of essentially you could just, hey, this lord of mine, I trust you, maybe right now. I want to try and give you control over this region. I'm going to trust you to auto manage this region of mine for me so I don't have to. And this will eventually, hopefully, be able to lead into a possible. Because I want to be able to have betrayals. Some of my best campaign moments have been betrayals or people being bribed away from my kingdom. And have it so that people could technically, possibly have it if they're a vassal of yours and they don't feel all that great about you. It's like, hey, I'm a cause a rebellion. I might just kind of rise up as my own little kingdom over here because you didn't give me what I wanted. You didn't keep me entertained.
Yeah. No, 100%. Vassal system is just something that's always kind of keeping you on your toes, I guess. Whatever game you're playing, really, and because the AI isn't obviously all that kind of positive towards you generally in Total War anyway, you often find yourself in kind of situations of betrayal. So it's always quite interesting and challenging. So yeah, I'd love to see a vassalization system. I think that you're not incentivized enough when, for example, you're declared war on to say, right, okay, well, this enemy is pretty big, and I trust this local kind of governor to kind of be a buffer almost. So I'm gonna release you. You become my vassal. By the way, you've got an enemy at your doorstep, so start raising some troops and um, good luck, kind of thing, and see how it goes. And who knows? Maybe, like you said, they're bribed and they turn against you, or they do raise enough armies, and together you manage to fend off the enemy. It can just lead to some really cool, interesting possibilities.
And I know I appreciate how Warhammer 3, I do really appreciate how it expanded on the allies and alliances and vassal system a little bit more, where it feels more useful to have them. But it's so obvious they will never betray you, ever. It's very rare for that to ever happen in like Warhammer 3 right now, where I do appreciate the idea of like, hey, I can have this vassal, I can borrow an army from them, or I can get unit types from them, and I can give them direct directions on where I want them to attack and stuff like that. I really appreciate those small little things, but this this kind of goes back to the fact that I think the more modern Total Wars don't have that same betrayal aspect as they did in older titles, not nearly as often, at least.
Yeah, it's just too easy, right? I mean, and the problem is you're not given enough of a downside for the decisions you're making. So you can have a vassal, they can have super high relations with you, but depending, like things like the size of your empire, the aggressiveness of your military expansion, maybe your belief system, your cultures, what you've done in the past, they just don't have enough of an impact on the vassal's opinion on you to actually lead to any sort of betrayal. They'll just kind of be your dog, and you can send it off doing something or raise an army. All those little things are great, but there's no downside to anything that you're doing, or there's very little downside anyway to make a difference.
Because I know I still very vividly remember it was me playing as the Zardum's Total War mod as the Roman Empire. At one point, my best general, literally my best general, the one that had been fighting against the Ottomans for years at that point, was bribed by them and joined the Ottomans. And things like that, it's such a small little thing, but it's such an immersive little moment. I still remember that campaign. That was like almost like 2 years ago that I did that campaign. At this point in time, like small little moments like that are so memorable and kind of something I think kind of are lacking in Total War nowadays recently. And I really want to be able to get that. I want to have it's like you can have a character you fucking love and be betrayed by them because it causes such an interesting emotion in the player. Don't want to have it to be annoying, but it's like it can cause some really interesting situations.
And it doesn't even need to be like a full betrayal either. Like, okay, the general's been bribed, but maybe like, I don't know, like 15-20% of the army is just like, wait, I don't want to fight for these people, and they kind of run away and join you. You still got the general who's betrayed you. He's beelining for your cities, but at least some of those troops are loyal to you. Like there are things you can do with this to make it not as annoying and frustrating for the player. Like Rome 2's Civil War mechanic is an absolute chore to deal with, so almost everybody turns it off through a mod or something, right? But
Yep.
if there was enough of a if there was more thought that went into it, a bit more design that went into, right, civil wars happened, you've got these cities, they've got these cities, but maybe you can, I don't know, you can bribe their general. There's a higher chance of bribing their generals to change sides, or I don't know, they are the one who seceded, maybe their cities get a bit of a penalty in this, that, and this way. And I don't know. There's just a lot more that you can do with stuff like this that just hasn't been done enough of.
I know for myself, I did not mind how the Stainless Steel Historical Improvement mod handled Civil Wars. And I think it's partially just because of the difference between how your cities operate and your units operate. Because I had to deal with so many Civil Wars when I was playing as the Holy Roman Empire. But every time my areas rebelled and a Civil War started, I at least still had my troops that were loyal to me in the city that were kicked out. It's like, okay, well, I had this general here. Yeah, my city rebelled here, but like I can try and take advantage of that. Okay, well, let me gather some mercenaries and crush this partial, like this little rebellion over here, and just like kind of keep going over the little pockets. It was slightly disruptive, but it was not nearly as disruptive and annoying as it is in Rome 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's
a question. How, if you have civil wars and Renaissance, and you've got like maybe civil wars that you have to deal with directly between yourself and another, could you have civil wars between between regions that you own, maybe, that you can either step into or just let happen? Do you know what I mean? Like kind of like in Crusader Kings, where you're kind of managing a kingdom, but within that kingdom there are provinces and smaller kind of realms that can fight and war against each other.
kind of like if you decided to give multiple areas to your vassals, and you're like, hey, these two vassals are fighting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see too much of an issue with that. It'd be kind of interesting to see, like, two of your own vassals start fighting with each other. I would still feel like you'd want to be able to try and have some way to tell them to stop. But I think
Yeah.
initially, at least, if we are able to get that Vassal system set up the way we want to, I probably would avoid that for now. But that's something I would like to be able to try and have, because I know for myself, whenever I've played Crusader Kings, I like the idea of me starting as a small vassal in a kingdom sometimes and like trying to build myself up in that area. Like that can be a really kind of cool gameplay element sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think Bannerlord did that really well as well. You're just starting as a small guy. You suddenly have a band of merry men. You join a kingdom. Maybe they give you a city. You're kind of like a vassal kind of state, and then before you know it, you're your own kingdom, challenging the status quo. That kind of like starting from nowhere and then becoming the power in the region. I think is again something that you can do a lot more with.
Would also make it a lot more interesting and not as insulting when the AI tries to ask you to be its vassal. I
Yeah.
That happens so often. It's like, what? No. Why do you think I'd be your vassal? Like, a system like this could make it so that you wouldn't be as opposed to it possibly, and you could actually kind of roleplay with that. It's like, oh, sure, I'm this tiny little guy. I'm gonna be vassalized by this far larger kingdom for right now, but that gives me some protection. Like, not as opposed to that, especially if you can actually like slowly like kind of raise up in the ranks and grow your power and maybe take over your sovereign at some point.
Yeah. Also, especially if you can edit and customize the terms of the vassalization. I mean, um, I think Stellaris has an excellent system of right. You want to vassalize this kind of this space empire. That's great, but they're only going to agree initially if you're not taking like 15% of their resources, or
Mm-hmm.
if you give them enough autonomy to attack others. So that kind of customization is would be interesting to do again as well for vassals.
Oh yeah, I would love to be able to have it so you can actually kind of argue your terms for a vassalization, because it always feels bad in like medieval 2. It's like, well, if I accept this, literally you're going to take all my money away and part of my income now, and it's like there's no benefit at all.
Yeah.
So definitely I want to be able to try and include some sort of more customization on that aspect.
Nice.
And then, so just to double check, so how we're feeling about time. If you feel we can talk for a little bit more, or do you think this might be a good place to end for right now? We have discussed quite a bit.
Yeah, I've got time. So up to you.
Okay, let's see. So, is there anything else that I would want to try and talk about? Let's see for ideas, because those were the main ones. So, sieges, kind of a little bit about battles, kind of a little bit about victory conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there any aspect of Total War that's like really stood out to you as an idea that you want to discuss right now while we've been talking, or not specifically?
Um, I mean, I can talk about all of it, but I think an interesting way of looking at it is what are the weakest elements of Total War right now?
Mm-hmm.
And like for example, one of them for me is diplomacy. I
Yeah.
like whenever I play, especially the later games, I find no incentive really of engaging with diplomacy. Unless I'm using a mod. I mean, one of the reasons why Dividend Impera is so impressive to me is you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you get into a 2 or 3 front war. So making sure you're invading this one nation, that's fair enough. You've got the power to do it, go for it. They can't stand you. But if you've got another front potentially that you're not securing either with another army or diplomatically, um, you're probably screwed. So having that kind of incentive to engage diplomatically with other factions, I think, is something that Total War is just completely missing on. I mean, Pharaoh, one of my biggest complaints was just I don't have any reason to engage in diplomacy other than to trade resources. It's
Yeah.
just it's so fundamentally tied to resource production that if you're running low on gold, all you have to do is scroll through the list, find this one faction that's producing tons of whatever food you've
Mm-hmm.
got surplus on, and give them everything and get tons of gold. Like that's all you're doing diplomacy with. It's just such a um, simplified and useless system right now. So having a really robust, dynamic, interesting, incentivized diplomatic system in your game, I think, is going to be really, really important. Or for me, anyway.
Yeah. And I agree, because I know it's something I think about a lot because I often at times really like doing world conquest campaigns or campaigns that essentially make me conquer most of the world, where I really enjoy at times with those campaigns where I have to actually think about who am I allied with, who am I at war with, and make sure that I actually am defending my flanks with my diplomacy. And it doesn't feel like that happens nearly as much in more modern Total Wars. I know, like with my Grimgore campaign that is recently finished in Warhammer 3, it was just war at all times. There was no way in hell to try and ally and have it make sense that like somebody could defend some flank on for me to make it so it'd be easier to expand into Cathay, for example.
Yeah.
I know a Cetra right now. Technically, I'm doing a Cetra campaign. Technically, I'm kind of actually having to consider that a little bit more because that one I want that to be like a first world conquest I do with Cetra because Cetra has to rule all.
True.
But like it's at some point I'm gonna hit a point in that campaign where it's not gonna matter. Like, oh yeah, sure, early game, try and have Scarbrand not murder the Bony Boys, but eventually I will have it so that like, oh, I'm not gonna care about diplomacy anymore. I'm just not gonna need to engage with it. It's just like, okay, I've got enough of a power built up around here. It's just okay, expand in this direction, expand in this direction, and expand in that direction. And part of me feels like the reason why in some regard is for me it's actually the terrain does not matter nearly as much in more modern Total Wars to me as it used to. I really appreciate, even though I know one of the guys that does kill with ratios of like my campaigns despises it, I don't mind the idea of having one city that's like a bastion of defense. Like, this is a border city. It's an important border city. And I will continue to repel invaders from this one point because it is in a really good spot because of the geography around it. It doesn't feel like that ever happens anymore in Total War at this point in time.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's actually not something I've paid much attention to now that I think about it. I mean, you've got, in Warhammer 3, you've got vast bodies of water, natural barriers to invasion, even though the AI sometimes sends a stack across the water to invade you. You've got mountains and even so, you've got huge amounts of just open land that doesn't have any sort of defensive value. So, yeah, I can see that being a problem. But yeah, I mean, you look at older games, you've definitely got natural areas where you can use a city to defend. I mean, a game like Attila, where you're the Western Roman Empire and you had invaders everywhere, rebellions everywhere. You had to pick and choose your kind of defensive frontier cities, essentially. And I think to a certain degree, some of them did have some natural kind of locations because of the geography around them. But you're right. I think later games have kind of lost that touch.
Mm-hmm. Especially for me, bridge battles. Bridge battles technically can still happen, but they're so rare nowadays that it's so sad because I love bridge battles. I honestly do. Like being a deep.
Medieval 2 is absolutely amazing for it too.
Mm-hmm. As long as you can convince the AI to try and walk across that bridge, or it sucks sometimes. You have to be the one walking across that bridge, but it feels good to know, like, hey, this crossing, we have to stop them at this crossing, and it just feels really good when you can defend against huge swaths of enemies because, hey, maybe you had some artillery with you, maybe you had some Greek fire with you or something like that. That makes it easier to funnel that spot.
Well, I think that leads to the interesting question of how are you doing your kind of battle tile map, and will that be reflective of the geography in the campaign that you have the battle in?
We definitely want to go back to the procedural generation of the Medieval 2. I really do want to have it so we'll consider the terrain you're around. It could just be like if we aren't able to get the procedural generation just right, because I know it can be extremely wonky, especially from like Medieval 2.
Oh yeah.
But I personally really want to be able to go back to that because some of my favorite defenses that I've had or favorite battles I've had have been some very weird and very interesting defensive positions based on the terrain for me. Because I think that matters so much to actually feel like you're actually in the area you're in and not, oh, I know I'm technically in like the Chaos Waste, but this looks like any generic area in the Chaos Waste. That to me is very... it doesn't feel that immersive to me, because it's like, well, yeah, I'm in this map, but I've seen this map 7 times because I'm just fighting the same areas over and over again. It doesn't feel like
Exactly.
it just feels like some little pocket dimension that I'm being brought to here instead of, well, nope. I'm fighting here. I can exactly see Rome to the west of me. I can see this river to the east of us. I can see the ocean to the south. Like it draws you in a little bit more. And I know we
Yeah,
definitely want to try and go back to procedural generation.
that's awesome because yeah, I mean, it gives you a kind of it gives you that added layer of an incentive in terms of how you're maneuvering your army around in the campaign and what areas you're going to be using for defensive positions or what terrain you want. Like you're starting to make decisions now on the campaign that affect how you're going to be playing in the battle, and that's just something that doesn't happen anymore. So
Because
yeah,
I know for me,
totally
I
agree.
oftentimes very much think about in Medieval 2, um, especially like right now, I'm fighting against the Ottomans in the Zarms mod, and the Ottomans are a crack, and they have so many armies. So it's like, okay, if I have one singular army walking around, let me make sure I'm near a mountain. If I'm near a mountain, it'll be far better for me to defensively. It's like small little things like that I'm actively having to
Yeah,
consider while playing instead of, oh, Warhammer. Okay, how far can I get? Let me just go as far as possible. Already. Oh, maybe I need to ambush somebody. Okay, what area has the best ambush chance? There. It's like, yeah, doesn't feel the same.
yeah. Yeah, it's just mechanically weak compared to what it was before. And because of the limited number of maps, you just get bored quite quickly. But again, it goes into that idea of spectacle and how mesmerizing a battle map is, um, how much work they go into it to make it cosmetically just visually stunning
And I think,
at first.
honestly, I would have preferred, I think, with the Warhammer franchise, if they would have put that effort into cities and just go with procedural generation for terrain. I would have preferred that, I think. Because that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why I love the Divide and Conquer mod, because the cities they have for Divide and Conquer are amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Mm, they are, yeah. I think it's interesting to kind of also discuss the balance between spectacle and mechanical kind of value and engagement with the player. Like there's definitely an element of Total War has kind of almost kind of the pendulum has swung firmly in the direction of we want you to be visually immersed in what you're doing in terms
Mm-hmm.
of okay, yeah, you might be seeing the same battle map over again, but when you're in the heat of it and you're watching your orcs charge at a line of Bretonian infantry, you're kind of you're in it, whereas
Yep.
in older games there is obviously a kind of visual kind of beauty to it, and part of that is nostalgia for me anyway. But there isn't as much of that. It's a lot more. There's kind of a better balance of mechanics and visual immersion. So yeah, how I don't know. I mean, do players today value one over the other a bit more, or would you try and strike a fine balance anyway, or how are you approaching kind of
For
that visual
for me,
immersion?
I would probably kind of lean more towards like trying to strike a good balance, because I know for me, I know this just from when I make intros for my playthroughs. It is harder to make a more cinematically interesting looking intro for the older Total Wars than it is for the more modern ones. Like I really like the intro I made for Cetra. It looks beautiful. It looks stunning. Um, Whereas if I try doing the same thing, even with like Attila or it just doesn't look the same. It doesn't look as visually eye catching. And I know I definitely want to try and have some sort of balance between that, because you do want the game to look pretty. You want it to feel like, oh, like for me at least, I think for myself, I lean more towards the spectacle of the kind of crazy amounts of destruction that you have maybe through like artillery pieces, like those
Hmm.
I think I lean more towards as opposed to other effects. Like for me, I like the idea of seeing, okay, hey, just I have a simple line of my troops fighting. I can have a lot of fun just like going through and seeing the battles, but there is a fine line with that. And I know I was actually kind of reading some comments on a Reddit thread of the difference between like the different sync combats between older and newer Total War titles, and how Shogun 2, that's like one of the few examples like they didn't not mind it being like just the dial thrown to 11 and just having to be crazy because of the spectacle.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a fine balance for that on the visual aspect and mechanical aspect. And for me personally, I lean more towards the mechanical aspect, because technically all game design is it's magic tricks. It's I'm trying to get this sensation through whatever means necessary to try and have it so like I'm giving the immersion and the feeling of, I know this is something that's been talked a lot with the team, of we've been really figuring out like how the fuck should archers work. How mechanically should archers work in hitting people? Because some of the people on the research team really want them to be very historically accurate, that if you ever hit like just a chest plate, it's never going to go through. And it's that fine balance there that I know we need to find, and I lean more towards the mechanical aspect, just make it function how you feel like it intuitively should. Like, okay, if I see a plate guy, if I shoot him with 20 arrows, I think one of those should kill him. Kind of idea.
Yeah, it's actually an interesting point you make, because the balance isn't even between visual spectacle and mechanical engagement. There's a third element there that you touched on, which is historical accuracy or authenticity. So how do you strike a balance between the three of them? Having a fun game that is historically authentic and that looks good as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that because later Total War games, like Medieval 2 onwards, essentially lost a lot of that mechanic depth, especially like kind of Rome 2 onwards, really.
Yep.
It's for me one of the biggest reasons mods are so interesting and engaging. A lot of the focus of mods is that is just right. Okay, we can't do anything really mechanically to battles, but we can do is just increase that visual immersion and spectacle to it, right? So you look at a mod like Divide and Impera, it's got like thousands of units that are custom made and reskinned and beautiful looking, and right, you're gonna have a similar kind of battle experience. Okay, slower, but at least when you're zooming in and having a look at what's going on, you've got these brilliant, unique looking shields and helmets, and you're like, wow, this is cool, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know that's going to be a challenging balancing act. I think at least like I've been really hammering this out, and I'm going to be talking about this in my next development update, of just the basic ways. And for me, I'm partially taking inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons from this, just because I play so much of that. Is the combat, mechanically speaking, does not need to be that complex to get the desired effect. You can add a lot of small little simple systems and have them compound on each other to give you the full effect that you want. And this is why I know, like, I hate the hit point system of the more recent Total Wars. I don't mind it as much in Warhammer, as it makes sense in Warhammer with single entities, but it never should have been used in Troy or Pharaoh, because I just like the far simpler idea of just, hey, you have this unit, he's got one hit point, he lives or dies based on essentially a dice roll, and it's far more immersive to be able to see, like, oh, I'm charging into this army, or I'm shooting this unit, and models do die on the first hit, because we never get that right now in more modern Total Wars. You have to shoot them for a couple times until units finally start dying.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think for many people, it's something that's easy to forgive because of that spectacle factor.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you just start noticing it, and it gets more annoying, and it starts actually being a detriment to the immersion of what you're doing. So, you know, absolutely, you charge an entire cavalry unit into the back of some heavy infantry. You want that morale to start dwindling away and them to be breaking, but when all of them just get back up, you're like, what the hell is this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so not having that system in your game would be a great thing, definitely. Going back to a dice roll And yeah, I mean, you're going to have to balance that with historical accuracy and how, for example, ranged warfare is going to work with that. There's going to be some interesting decisions that you're going to have to make, um, but the older games are great inspiration for that. They do some good stuff.
Oh yeah. So do we think we want to continue going? I know we're right now a little bit over an hour, and originally only planned this to be an hour. I think we had some good discussions though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've got to go in maybe like 9 minutes. So if you want to, we can keep going or can end here. I don't mind.
I'm not opposed to ending here because I haven't had breakfast yet, so I would appreciate being
Okay,
able to go
cool.
make my food. But
Yeah, yeah, no worries, no worries at all.
But yeah, no, I thank you for this discussion. I think it was really fun to have this. I'm going to hope that anybody watching this video, definitely feel free to leave thoughts on anything we discussed. I know that's some of the best aspects of this is just being able to get other people's opinions of the things that we discussed. That's part of the reason I always really enjoy making these videos, just reading those comments. But I'm going to thank you to the Terminator for joining me here and everyone else that watched this video. But this is Rampant, and I'll see you guys next time.